Gray yard, wet grass, a wind that steals excuses, and then looks you in the eye to see what you've got left. The butts field is a row of straw faces bound with wattle, square enough in the dim until you sight across them and see the truth. One leans, one smiles, one wants to be a door. You're the newest butt warden's mate on the morning set, peg bag on your hip, a coil of shooting cord in your fist, a stub of chalk that will make friends or enemies depending on your wrist. If you like watching a practice ground turn into a quiet law without anyone needing to shout, come with me, tap subscribe and ring the bell. We'll make targets matter and teach the day not to lie. Orders are plain because the captain hates invention before breakfast. Set the range cord straight, square the butts, check bow weight, post the day's count. A lad at the rear, coat open to the weather, mutters for his own benefit. Targets don't fight back. The captain points at the worn center that wants to be truth. Make them matter. You nod and kneel. Peg taps, tap tap, turn, tap. You run the shooting cord across the turf and feel it argue with your fingers the way cords do when they're new to being trusted. Chalk the first line from left peg to right, a straight that tells pride where not to hide. The cord must be posted before the horn peels loose. Set too close and pride cheats. Set too far and form breaks. Your job is a line that lets both honesty and confidence keep their breakfast. Square the faces, the sergeant says, not loud. He rams a butt peg with his palm and leans the bail until its crosshairs look like they mean it. You stamp the footing along the firing line, heel down into soft, toes found for grip. Your chalk finds 30, 40, and 60, rings on the grass that teach distance a grammar. You mark the danger spots off last year's stray list, 2 low swales that wake when the dew gives up, white dots for the morning to remember where not to land. A bow creaks under cold the way old ships do. You glance without moving your head. Waxed string complained, not limb, linen bracer is snug. You chalk a tiny X on the tally board under strings watched, not because it's a sin, but because this field runs on verbs you can point to later. Bow weights, the lieutenant says from his stool, and the stack of scales on the plank looks impatient. You sight the first stave, weigh the limbs with your palm the way men learn to know bread, hang it on the hook, and let the pointer find its fact. You call the number, he logs it. Your chalk makes a second ring on the turf without looking. Habit has learned your bones. The line cord tries to curve with the ground's old story. You tell it today's plot, straight. You peg again at ankle depth and pull shallow where a boot will need a moment's pause. Hand signs travel the length. 2 fingers and a push, step, flat palm, hold, fist down, down. A boy 2 files right interprets hold as think about breakfast again. The sergeant's eyebrows correct him without ink. The whistle chirps a rehearsal, knock, draw, loose, and dies in the wind to find out who flinched. Drums stay muffled for the mark read, we're not making music, we're measuring. The captain's eye drops to your cord hand and stays there long enough to give your knuckles manners. You set 40 back by half a boot. The lads take it like medicine. Pride wanted the nearer ring, form wanted the farther. You gave them both what they didn't ask for. Target dressing next. The spare sack of straw for wounded butts is tied against the paling. You lift, wedge, and stitch the center where last night's arrows bragged in a circle that isn't helpful to anyone today. Chalk rings on 2 faces get renewed with neat wrists. No showy spirals, no painted drama. The mark must be credible so that misses matter and hits are cheaper than lies. You plumb the posts with a string and a pebble. A bail that leans left will teach every archer to forgive their own error or build one. Square, then step back, then square again. The horn tries its throat. You're not ready to love its song yet. You check the bows again because a body that will draw in cold must be believed by the thing it's drawing. Wax blocks thud down the line, and palms learn what warmth can do to string. Dry string first. The captain replaced Saturday slack with that after 2 limbs went quiet in last winter's sleet, and 3 men learned to worship linen. You log who swapped. White chalk ticks on the board under strings set by. Cord, the sergeant calls. You peg 1 more time and pull 1 more honest straight across the green. The line breathes in, the line breathes out. The lad with the mutter looks at the worn center, and sees a job rather than a story. Your chalk finds the distance posts with half a circle, the kind a boot likes to meet. Suspense sits behind your shoulder like a cat. You could set the near mark 2 paces closer to make the count look good. Pride would pay with neighborhood voices later. You could pull the far mark a pace farther to teach humility. Form would slip into anger and wrists would forget the quiet drill. Set feet, breathe, break. You split the difference because arithmetic needs allies. Loose, the whistle will say. Your line has to mean it. You pace the butts again and pull 2 shafts the last crew forgot to tally. Blue tags for weighted heads. Wind test later if the breeze decides to have opinions. Yellow tags to teach men that the wind has an accent and they are not fluent yet. Your ledger gets its verbs, pegged, dressed, loosed, set by. The lieutenant's pencil murmurs them into his own book like a prayer for numbers. Provost at the cord, someone mutters, as if he were weather. He comes with a small book that thinks it is a conscience and a face that expects to own your peg because he arrived with a word. Inspection, he says. If you let him onto the cord, you stir gossip. If you bar him, he leaves with their cooking the range. Either way, the loose will not wait. You draw a thin line in the turf with your peg, threshold only, and hand him the tally board. Straight, posted, weighed. You say evenly. He leans over the cord, smells dew and chalk, finds nothing to hire, and leaves. A pot of ink tips itself across your shaft book because a cold thumb thought it was a palm. You slip your wrist under the flood and rescue the column with the numbers that matter, rewriting 3 from memory while your other hand finds the stringer and shows a lad how to lift with his knees and not his pride. 2 files swap lanes because habit outran instruction. You walk them back by half files in the shadow while a lantern crawls closer, a soft voice and a hand sign rather than an argument with nouns. The horn peals loose proper this time. Whistle, knock, whistle, draw, whistle loose. Waxed strings sing without bragging. Linen bracers whisper their small prayers. The captain watches the center, not the line, and the line behaves because the center is telling the truth you made it tell. Shaft after shaft thuds, straw crackles. Here and there a miss hits ground and throws wet into a neighbor's shins. You add 1 dot under strays arrested, and 1 under butts dressed on the lieutenant's board. You teach the morning that tally is not scolding. It's a mirror without a temper. Mark red, drums muffled, whistle sharp. You pace to the targets with your chalk and your temperate voice. Touch, don't tug, you say. Count, don't argue. You call numbers, the lieutenant reads them back. The lad who muttered earlier learns the sound of his own name in numbers and straightens without anyone having to announce that this is what pride feels like when it isn't lying. Hidden worlds move under the straw. Last year's stray list says the far left dip wakes when the sun lands. You checked it and found it still asleep. You mark the rack with 2 fresh pairs of spare bows, because wood that travels wants friends. Your pocket drill, set feet, breathe, break, gets tested in the glove of your left hand while your right pegs the cord again for the 2nd string. You did not invent this, you are helping it remember itself. The captain's eye finds your cord hand again as the line resets. He doesn't nod, he doesn't need to. That is the compliment you arrived for. If it were your yard, if the wind stole excuses and a lad muttered targets don't fight back, how would you set the near ring at first light, closer for confidence or farther for form? Put your vote and where you're watching from in the comments. I read them when the wax is off my fingers and the cord asks whether it belongs on the turf again. You coil the slack and peg the cord once more. The whistle will chirp 3 times and a habit will answer. The range is set, the butts square, the bow weights posted, the day's count chalked where pride can see it. The line breathes, the captain's book waits for numbers, the lieutenant's pencil wants more verbs. You stamp the footing 1 last time, knowing boots will finish the job. When the horn peels loose again, it will be the truth, not a wish. Targets don't fight back. They tell you when you lied to your own feet. You made them matter. Dew settles, takes possession, and then forgets to leave. The cord is cold in your palm. The pegs knock a little tune your wrist knows by heart. Routine is the law that makes morning behave. Before sun, peg the line. Tap, tap, turn, tap. Run the cord true. No swales, no proud humps, no invitations for pride to cheat. Chalk the rings clean at 30, 40, 60 so distance has a grammar the youngest can read. The butts get dressed, faces squared, centers stuffed where they bragged too much last night, straw crackling like a polite fire. At the whistle, knock, draw, loose. At the mark read, pull, pace back, don't posture. At lull, rotate frayed strings out for waxed. Saturday slack is dead and buried. Dry string first is a law that keeps fingers and limbs fond of one another. You sling a length of laundry rope between uprights to air spares. Wax blocks thud down the line like sensible punctuation. You draft the rota in chalk along the plank, small as a recipe, butt menders forward at the first lull. Hands that know how to make straw honest, shaft pullers to lanes, 2 per, 3 on wind, 1 to walk the outer berm arresting strays and tempers. Reserves to the far line to widen on command. They will pretend to be bored now and be grateful later when their boredom turns into steadying a friend's back. Your job, written on your knuckles, set the shooting sequence. Tie-colored tags on shafts where a glance can decide what the hour means. White for practice, the daily bread. Blue for weighted heads, the truth about distance under a friendly sky. Yellow for wind test, teach the bow to speak an accent it doesn't like. Your ledger opens and learns 4 verbs again: pegged, dressed, loosed, set by. The lieutenant's pencil murmurs them into his quieter book. Peg taps, straw crackle, horn peal for read. The day pretends it is already learned. It hasn't. Provost arrives with a small book that would like to be a conscience, and boots that would prefer gravel to grass. Inspection, he says, rehearsed, eye on the cord, as if he brought the word that makes lines true. If you let him step over the cord, you'll stir gossip. They're cooking the range. If you bar him, he'll leave with the same sentence, just written in a different tone. Either way, the morning loose will not wait on his posture. You drag a peg tip across the turf, threshold only, and hand him the shaft book instead. Posted, weighed, read. He leans, finds due, chalk, not theater, and grudgingly becomes part of the scenery. The whistle chirps once to settle hands. Bows hum their dry hymn. You pace the line and catch fray where it always tries to hide. Swap, you tell a lad whose limb groaned under cold. He looks like a person who wants to prove something. Prove aim, you add without a sermon. He retreats, waxes, comes back with string and temper both quieter. Inkpot tips across your shaft book because a chilly thumb thought it was a palm. You slide your wrist under the flood and rescue the column that counts. 3 entries drown. Your head rewrites them, while your hand blots and your mouth keeps telling the next 2 files where to put their feet. 2 lanes swap without asking, habit outrunning instruction. You redress the line in the shadow while a lantern crawls closer, half-file step, a hand sign for hold, a quiet down for the one who thinks adjusting height is an argument. The cord stays true. The morning keeps pretending it planned this. A friar palms you a chit from the alderman, wax attempting to make an order out of an opinion. Opened by order, the face says. Closer peg for a certain tent, the whisper means. You file it in the drawer that kills paper gently and tie a yellow tag on the nearest weed as a private joke your conscience approves. The friar's eyes practice disappointment like a trade. Horn peals for reed. Drums muffle. You walk the meadow with chalk and count for the lieutenant, who prefers numbers to stories. Touch, don't tug, you tell the pullers. Count, don't argue. White for practice goes home mostly honest. Blue shows where wrists lied about distance and got caught. Yellow draws little diagrams in the straw that will make sense when the wind decides to remember itself. Wax blocks thud down the line again. Palms move like men who have decided to live longer. Dry string first, you hear in 3 places you weren't standing. A good phrase travels by itself. A porter sidles behind a bale and offers extra heads to a corporal who doesn't deserve the weight. Your look performs the arithmetic he can't. He learns subtraction. In the same hour, a folded open by order wafts in a cousin's hand, aiming at a closer peg. The seal smells like pocket. You flatten it with your palm until it remembers paper is not a voice. There is a second, secret slate in your coat. 3 corporals never take turn at the back post. You erase one name because last night he swapped places with a lad who needed a nearer mark and never bragged about it. The other 2 you carry into tomorrow like a thorn you intend to earn the right to pluck. Loose. The whistles say it without pride, and the line answers without theater. Waxed strings sing. Linen bracers whisper their small prayers. White fletchings bloom and vanish. The captain watches the center, not the hands. Your cord, true, keeps his jaw from teaching the wrong lesson. You log loosed with a tick, dressed with another. The lads who think targets don't fight back discover that distance does. Wind freshens. Yellow heads go to work. You step behind a boy's elbow and lift his shoulder with 2 fingers, not an order, but an idea. Set feet, breathe, break, you remind him, pocket drill. He obeys the rhythm and forgives his own bow. A miss becomes a mirror instead of a morale speech. The provost circles again, looking for an audience. You draw your peg line on the turf again and make it new because sometimes theater is polite. He stops at threshold, learns a second time how to behave near cord, and leaves with less to sell. Mark read again. Pace, chalk, blue, 3 at 40, 1 at 60, count the walk. He counts. Pride learns arithmetic. You dress a butt whose center bragged itself open. Spare straw for wounded faces. Sack tied earlier pays for itself now. You replace a leaning peg and call it nothing. By lull, you rotate frayed strings out and waxed in. You tie colored tags on a handful of shafts that want a second life later. White to the repair rack, blue to the weight crate, yellow to the wind box. Peg taps. Straw crackle. Laundry rope lifts spare boughs to breathe. The line thinks it was born this way. If a provost wanted inside the cord to quiet rumor, would you let him, inside inspection, or keep him threshold only? Put your vote and where you're watching from below. I read them when the dew finally stops pretending to be helpful and the cord asks to be pegged again. You coil slack, set pegs, chalk rings. Ledger, pegged, dressed, loosed, set by. The lieutenant's pencil learns the morning by heart. The captain's eye crosses your cord hand without stopping. That is the compliment this job understands. Another loose waits. The cord is straight, the butts are honest. The day is learning to speak without shouting. Frost kisses the bale faces. Thaw wakes underneath. Ink goes sulky in the well and waits to be corded. You fetch warm wax for a stiff string and nick a clogged quill for the tally until it remembers what a nib is for. By the fence, a market man rents his throat to a rumor. They put captains on close marks and fathers at far. He tests 3 tones to see which one will buy him coin. The warden doesn't argue. He lays his palm on the cordon bar. Warden's peace at the cordon. Then to you, short orders that make your wrists honest. Demonstration without spectacle. Move the cord in the open. Mend the butt first for the novice lane. Chalk fresh on the board, firm here, danger there. From the church steps, the sacrist adds what your shoulders already believed. No clatter, mass. Your morning becomes a fast shuttle of small courtesies. Front cord, butt cart, far wing, back and forth until the field learns it is being watched. You cradle spare bales under canvas so they don't brag. You peg where the frost stayed loyal, dress where the thaw began to lie, stamp the seam yourself so the first boot won't be surprised. You pin the new cord in a shallow arc and pull it straight in public because geometry is kinder than retorts. Then the choice that buys you critics either way. Post the cord shift first, clean, visible, arithmetic, and the townsmen cry favoritism. See, the captains get firm, fathers get far. Post the rotation list first. Needier, fair, to show who's up at close and who's on far. And the captain fumes, you're teaching people their place matters more than their form. While you're deciding, a passerby will spy a blue tag weighted head and shout cheat instead of rule if you let it look like a secret. So you pick your order. Path first, promise second. Cord in the open, rotation immediately after, weighted heads laid on the plank where boots can see they belong to wind test hour, not to vanity. The captain's clerk arrives on cue. Rhoda torn down the spine by a thumb in a hurry. Paste, thread, the little iron he keeps under his cuff against 6 rules and a superstition. You hold a corner and let him triage. No clatter, the sacrist reminds the iron when it considers performing. The clerk grins and stitches quieter. A herald's trumpet slices rising talk into bits too small to hire. The cellarer hisses move at a knot of shoulders that thought they were a conversation. A boy sags at full draw, you steady his elbow with your sleeve and tap his shoulder with 2 fingers. Set feet, breathe, break. You murmur, pocket drill. So the line hears practice, not panic. He obeys the rhythm. The arrow forgives him. You chalk the public board near the bar. Firm here, danger there, in a hand that refuses drama. Under it 2 new columns the council learned to love: butts dressed, strays arrested. 2 ticks under dressed, novice lane first, C2 patched, D4 refaced. 1 under strays, outer berm caught 3. To the side you write the hour and the reassurance that keeps markets from riot, sureties for good behavior to be taken at mid-bell. Warden's peace at the cordon, meanwhile. The chord move, pegs tapping, chord humming, happens where people can watch and forget to shout. The novice butt gets its center stuffed first. You pat straw into truth and square the frame with a string and a pebble. Chalk rings get renewed with neat wrists. No spirals that think they're art. The rotation list goes up while the chord still hums. Close peg names, far peg names, dry string first. No favorite's cousin sneaking a peg. If someone squints for his entitlement, the list stares back until he learns to read. A friar arrives with a chit from the alderman, wax that confuses polish for law. Open by order, the face claims. Closer peg for a tent with a purse, the whisper means. You slide it under the tally and let paper learn patience until it dies of it. Meanwhile, a blue tag bundle of weighted heads sits openly on the plank with a chalk mark that says wind test 3rd hour. You murmur rule into the space a passerby's mouth meant for cheat, and he hears you because arithmetic is louder than his story. A priest spots chalk sigils blooming on 2 risers and says, "No charms on kit. Device, not charm. You note in your book and wipe the marks off with vinegar." The apothecary strolls by selling a sentence. Peas and felt save bowels, wax saves wrists. Let him. Wax does. You put a rosemary sprig by the water tub to keep hands sweet and leave magic to people who can afford it. By the time the council bell lifts a hush that even the market man respects, your proof looks like furniture. Chord shifted in the open, novice lane dressed first, rotation posted without a cousin in it. Butts that tell the truth about where center actually is. You read the board aloud for the edge of the crowd that pretends letters are for other men. Firm here, danger there. Butts dressed, 2, strays arrested, 3. Sureties at mid-bell. The trumpet answers with a civility you didn't think it had. If it were your hour, if the warden ordered demonstration without spectacle, what would you post first? Chord first or rotation first? Put it and where you're watching from below. I read them when the ink stops sulking and the chord asks to be pegged again. You finish your sprint, front chord, butt cart, far wing. The captain sees the sequence, sees the board, sees your blue tag head sitting in daylight, and doesn't fume. That's permission enough. The boy at full draw finds his breath again. The myth at the fence runs out of buyers. The sacrist takes his palm off the door. The line knocks without clatter. You leave the proof where it belongs, quiet and obvious. The field decides to behave. Torches gutter and make the yard look smaller and meaner than it was at noon. Gates bar with that elbow-deep clunk that ends the day whether anyone agrees. Word, which keeps its own hours, walks past the yard and hires a chorus. Blind marks, favored Fletch. The square likes a rhyme when it thinks it got cheated of a nearer peg. Inside, the hall meets by candle to do the town's quiet work, turn mockery into policy. The beetle taps your plank twice with a stick that thinks it writes law. Copy fair, copy fast, flawless. You square the sheet. The quill obeys your hand because your hand has learned not to consult your feelings. Public notice. Quiet passage to and from the chord. You write where boots will be forced to read before throats can improvise. Fines, written as alms because the cellarer likes the taste, for broken pegs. Novice lane dressed first. On paper, orders to post the day's range and wind at dawn so rumor wakes up unemployed. You leave small doors for a city to breathe. Save collapse, save fever, save order under strain. Sand hisses, the line goes matte. Before it dries, a flare in the shed blooms. Orange climbs too fast. You and 2 boys are already moving. Buckets find your hands like they were born there. Wet wool hisses on embered planks, and the line at the gate forgets its lyrics long enough to watch flame learn manners. Rosemary and Vinegar return to their quieter work of smelling like discipline. Back at the plank, the beetle plants a knuckle on the margin. A small slip slides under your thumb with the practiced innocence of a profitable sin. "Keep this quiet," the neat hand says. You lay it under the ledger and rest your palm until paper remembers that filing is a kind of death. Omit it forever. Your bone tells your nerve. Your nerve sits. A coin rings on your plank and refuses to shine. The dead carrier's sister stands there with shoulders like broom handles and a voice built to hold 5 words. Save the sick from far marks. Not loud, truer than the jeer outside. You point your pen at the clause that teaches exceptions not to breed and write what the range needed to learn. Novice and sick on close posts in foul wind. Far only on clear. The beetle coughs at the line that will cost him a friend. You keep the curve of the S steady as if dignity could be written into vowels. Under the guest loft, a trap yawns. Men step down with private purses and come up with lighter pockets and better stories. Extra pegs, extra strings. A porter has discovered he likes counting with his palm. You lift the hatch with a peg just enough to count and close it again with a promise your shoulder can pay for in the morning. 2 more pegs gone than posted. 2 fewer strings returned than sworn. Make it a line, the cellarer's hand says on your shoulder. With nails. You nod. Wood can learn policy too. You carry the fresh notice to the bar. Key rings, stacked like teeth on the bailiff's belt chatter, when the cartwheel squeals its old grievance. Someone shames it with grease, and the purr returns. You nail the paper where hands can't pretend they weren't told. A drum under the board gives the words a little spine. Suspense moves in. If the jeers aren't answered, the bar will try to be a song. If you answer wrong, your name slides onto the stone the clerk keeps oiled, to be silenced. Either way, the morning loose will not wait, and the company needs a dawn more than your pride. Inside, tallies of peg amercements line up under your pencil. Recognizances with awkward crosses shiver into the docket, some firm, some sideways, some made by hands that prefer tools to pens. Rosemary and Vinegar steam lift the room's patience a half inch. The astrologer drifts in, declares the hour lucky if men stop talking, then pushes the lucky hour forward with his thumb when clouds thicken. Nobody pays him and he doesn't take it personally. A patron's runner offers a folded chit with wax that confuses polish for law. Open by order, it claims, chin high toward your margin. You put it under the same palm that smothered the beetle's slip and let paper learn to die politely. Now the contested name. It warms your pocket like a small stove. A corporal, whose cousin stands too often with the steward under the arch, expects a turn at the close peg because entitlement knows where heat lives. He doesn't belong there. Another name does. The novice who stitched a butt in sleet without being asked. The convalescent who returned his string and his temper 3 times this week. Erase or obey. Unlock or relock. You lay the bad name on the plank over the rosemary tack and let friction pretend to be fate. You set him aside. You write the other in a hand the company has learned to trust and punish. Your handwriting is where mercy lives. The hall will teach you later what it costs to be recognized by your letters. The beetle's cough finally locates the line that will make him defend you to men who look like his friends. The warden signs with the letter that doesn't blush. The clerk from the hall smooths the page with 2 fingers as if he intends to recite it elsewhere and own a share. A friar palms you a chit from the alderman. You let him watch you file it in the drawer where paper goes to learn patience until it dies of it. You go back to the trap under the loft and ask the dark for arithmetic. Extra pegs? Extra strings? The porter's smile gives back 1 tooth. You count again. 2 gone than posted. 2 fewer returned than sworn. The cellarer's thumb presses your shoulder like a nail. Make it wood. You nod. Morning will learn carpentry. The outer bar leans again, and a herald's trumpet cuts the sound into obedient pieces. You read the notice aloud because policy grows up when it hears itself. Quiet passage. Fines for broken pegs. Novice lane dressed first. Range and wind at dawn. The market man tests favored Fletch one last time and watches the board ignore him like old wood ignores adjectives. If it were your plank, if a sister's coin rang dull where your sand still dried, if a patron's slip asked your margin to forget itself, if a name in your pocket insisted on warmth it hadn't earned, What would you write? Omit or obey? Put it and where you're watching from below. I read them when the wax flakes from my fingers and the cord asks whether it belongs on the turf again. You knot the notice where the drum can keep it company. You file the coin in the dish that will be the only place tonight where money does what it's told. You file the chits in the drawer that kills them softly. You leave the contested name where rosemary can keep it from sticking to your hand again. You bank the brazier, torches, gutter, gates, bar. The hall smells like ink that decided to be honest and smoke that learned restraint. Outside, a company is learning quiet rules by cord and chalk instead of threat. That is the price of practice on paper, and the road will keep the bargain. Dawn unlatches the yard. Trumpets wet their lips. Drums find the beat they practiced yesterday and lend it to the square. The velvet voice climbs its crate by the bar and pins the morning to the cord. His Grace commends those who kept quiet order on the cord. Ranges are chalked because a bargain in ink said they must be. Windows stand open not from virtue, but from a rule that knew how to write itself into air. The brazier glows the way a good tool glows, only because the order allowed it, not because anyone needed to admire it. The market man with the myth strolls past the fence free as air, trying out a new sentence on the morning and deciding to save it for the next crowd. A midwife's lintel wears a yellow tag instead of red. Someone paid attention last night and someone else admitted they were wrong. Near the cooper's stall, a widow folds to the cobbles. Two strangers make a chair of their hands and lift her as if the city had rehearsed it, which it has. Your errands are the kind that make a day behave. You are final witness and courier of consequences. First duplicate to the warden, quiet passage to and from the cord, fines called alms to keep peace with ears for broken pegs. Novice Lane dressed first, day's range and wind to be posted at dawn. He signs with the letter that doesn't blush and gives you only a look. I saw. Second duplicate to the captain, the dry rota, the repaired rota stitched by the clerk's little iron, the counts of butts dressed and strays arrested. She scans for arithmetic, not adjectives, nods, and spares you both a speech. Third to the guild, hung where money pretends to learn manners, a snowfall of paper that settles dust without cleaning blood. Over yesterday's shut-ups for false oath, a muster sheet for the king's levy is pinned, wide as appetite. Names start to bud at the bottom where pride and debt keep their appointment. You finally understand what daily butts bought. Not glamour, but obedience. Not luxury, but lanes that move, bellies steady, lines that hold, and a harvest of men promised for later because a straight cord is useful to more than archers. The dry rota is pinned over the board, close peg, far peg, dry string first, with the calm you wished for last week. Vinegar coins clink in ladles at the chest, chests of fines groan into carts and perform their little purr after somebody shames the wheels with grease. A parchment marked misadventure for a slip at wet flags goes into the docket, a lie with a warm heart that keeps the morning cheap. The last rosemary bundle smolders to ash on the brick. The priest who warned against charms chalked on risers watches it die and decides to respect devices publicly for a week. Then the drawer in your coat reminds you it exists, the secret slate of spared rotations, the 3 men who didn't take their turn because you decided luck owed them interest. The side list of pegs you shifted against orders when thaw lied under frost, and you made the seam tell the truth. Leak, burn, or file. You hold both like hot bread. Leak would be honest and short-lived. You would be too. It would splash in the square like a good sin and die when nobody could afford to adopt it. Burn would be quick and teach you nothing except how to be colder. File is the story this corner survives by, proof where questions with hats can find it, nowhere near mouths with errands. You slide slate and list into the drawer under the ledger and listen for the click that promises a better hour will be allowed to ask you why. File. The steward finds you as enamel always does. He offers a badge to mark more wisely, as if clarity were a party trick you refuse to perform. The guildmaster occupies the shade near your shoulder and offers sanctuary till the pest passes, which is the dangerous kindness that fits under a coat. The warden passes and does what he does best in your direction. Not nothing, not much. I saw. You answer all 3 with what you own. Keys, cord, brazier, silence. Here, your wrists say, you keep your post. Public reading by the bar begins again because Velvet loves threes. The drum gives the notice its spine. The captain's clerk flits in long enough to check the knot on the rota and disappears before the market man can hire his breath. The sacrist rubs his palm along the church door and decides the wood can keep quiet without supervision. The cellarer hisses move at a shadow out of habit. Nobody minds. A runner from the alderman tries you with a new chit. Open by order, the wax whispers in a humbler tone. You set it under your palm and let your hand decide. Omit. You chalk a dot on your wrist to remind yourself who deserves your braver voice later, the novice whose lane you dressed in sleet, and the convalescent whose string you warmed against orders. Rules are supposed to keep people alive, not busy. If you had to choose, soft under a patron's livery or hard under sanctuary eaves, what keeps you whole, livery or sanctuary? Put it and where you're watching from below. I count them after the last wax flake leaves my fingers, and the cord asks whether it belongs on the turf again. By noon, the extracts have turned into furniture. People lean on them and forget the time when paper had to prove itself. The levy clerk finds a way to keep his line moving without explaining his face. The market man tests a new myth and discovers grief has better ears than appetite. The board holds, the cord stays true. The line breathes without you needing to give it a mouth. Justice this week was airflow and cord budget. Mercy was policy, not indulgence. Survival was the choreography of chalk, pegs, and staves performed by people who don't need to be sung about to do it again. You were the hinge, you coil the slack, you pocket the keys, you bank the brazier. The horn will say knock, and the whistle will say draw, and the cord will mean loose. The road will keep its bargain if you keep yours.